off the top of my head, I can't remember, but criticism that I've heard just, out in the community and among other folks who participated in that was sort of like, what happened? I thought we had all these great ideas that were going to help bring down the cost of housing organically and help to create some more supply, and, which helps to bring the cost down. And then I think the last thing I would just say is, I think that, I know even some local developers that are doing a lot of work outside of this market, and I'm curious to know why, because they're building housing in places like Bend and they're not doing it here. And I don't know if it'd be helpful just to kind of understand, like, what is it about, the cost of doing things, the owner's process, whatever it is that is causing, people not to want to invest in this community and to build some of those types of housing. And there's some, so there's rather large housing development, like I said, in Bend that, this would be a great place for something like that. So just some comments, but I just wanted to, I really appreciate all the work, and it's important stuff. So thanks, Amanda.
Commissioner Fragola.
Hey, so yeah, thank you for the presentation. I've been looking forward to this. I also sat on the Housing Tools and Strategies group or committee, rather large committee, and this was one of the recommendations that came out of it. So it's great to see it moving so far along. I have two questions. I mean, I'm curious. I know this is a city plan, but in what way do we think about collaborating with the county in terms of getting more traction? And will that
recording in progress?
And then I'm really curious how we define downtown. Is it just the part of the city named the downtown, or are we talking about a larger area? Because I can walk to Kesey Square in 10 minutes. I feel like I live downtown. I live in the friendly area neighborhood. So I'm curious how we define downtown.
Hi, my name is Will Dowdy. I'm the Community Development Director, and I think probably answer both of those a little bit. The first one is, the first one's a great question. It has to do a little bit with the nature of the HIP. And the answer is that it's a little bit of both. I mean, it's going to be one of those kinds of answers. On one hand, a big part of what the HIP is doing is actually consolidating and organizing a number of different existing work plans and priorities and projects that are ongoing through the city. So in that way, I would say that there's the places where we have existing relationships with Lane County and are doing existing work with Lane County, that is just brought right into the HIP. You can certainly recognize kind of a parallel situation with a lot of the work that you have been involved with as a planning commission and that the planning team has been doing, especially around state mandates. It's getting pulled in directly rather than being rehashed or kind of put in pieces on the drawing table. So so I think that's where it's doing it well and to as good as we have been. So especially around homelessness, the joint efforts there directly play in. I think that one of the opportunities for us as we move forward with the HIP is to do better coordination with Lane County and also with some of the other neighboring municipalities. The question about downtown is a great one. It's a perennial question about downtown, which is just where is it? And we have lots of different boundaries for downtown. The one that we've been using for the goals is the downtown plan boundary from 2004 because it's existing, because it's as good of a boundary as you can find anywhere. There's other good boundaries as well, but this is one that feels like it's a pretty good fit, and it comes out of planning documentation. So that's one that we use. The downtown plan boundary goes, I can never remember. It's like Lincoln or Lawrence on the west side. It goes to Hilliard on the east and up to the river. I think it goes to the train tracks on the north. And then the southern boundary is a combination of 13th and 11th. So it's, I'm not actually sure how that boundary was generated, but that's the one we're using when we're talking about the number of dwelling units that are in that area. But certainly there's ways in which it's too big and there's ways in which it's too small.
Great. Thank you very much, Will.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
So I might separate out my questions. I have quite a few. Oh, wait a minute. I don't know what happened to my, yeah, there we go. So one, thank you for the presentation. I also, this is exciting. And as we heard from the hearing, this is a really important component to this process, because what we were hearing from the public, really what I was hearing was predominantly related to this document and the tools that we can help create or help encourage and sustain affordable housing. So I want a couple questions. One, to respond to just provide some context to Commissioner Edwards' comment, just what I've heard from residential developers. There's a few things. One, cost of housing in Eugene is fairly high, yet the rent doesn't allow for performance to actually be successful or effective. So you'll find housing developers might go to Bend or Portland. It's the same cost to develop, yet they can get higher rents. So essentially making the development viable. The other is that we have a very active community and a high percentage of appeals. So there's, if you're going to make a big investment, the risk of having to go through appeals is not something some residential developers are really going to be interested in. So there are some other pieces, but those kind of, I would say more generally, are the comments that I hear. So that goes to a couple pieces of kind of questions as well as follow-up. Align land use application fees with affordable housing, with housing affordability priorities. I just want to stress how burdensome and how lengthy application processes are. MUPD, I think that that's a great tool. Having it expand beyond downtown I would encourage us, City Council, to look at that further. I do think the process there is a high burden of proof. And where I get concerned is, what about those mom and pop developers? What about that single property owner that wants to take their large lot? We heard from the public that have lots like that could take advantage of the missing middle development. Yet providing professional services, seeing what it costs in order to meet the burden of proof, is daunting for the average mom and pop and for an individual homeowner. It's also quite complicated. So that is why I love that we have clear and objective standards. The more we can get a streamlined process and be able to facilitate certain processes that is a clear process, that you don't have to have for a more straightforward property. I mean, yes, you can have some with wetlands, etc., but a pretty straightforward site within our kind of more concentrated developed area that's flat, etc. Somehow, if we can get that burden of proof so that really a mom and pop don't have to hire a whole team of consultants in order to get through a lengthy, expensive process. So, I mean, I think you're going to get a lot of support in terms of participation to potentially be able to brainstorm what that might be. I would love to see that happen, because I would love to see the public that we heard from last time be able to facilitate that process. So that also has to do with renter protections. Also keep in mind that what we're talking about is wanting to encourage single family owners to infill on their own property, mom and pop developers. Rental protections, just balance what that means in terms of the burden. And I know, coming from living in some very high renter protection areas, like Berkeley, California. So making sure we're making right decisions for our community and the best result that we want. And I'm an advocate of renter protection, so please don't get me wrong. I think they're really important. I just think it's important we take a close look at those and what the implications are potentially to adding new houses into the market. The other is the MUPD process. What are there, what would the time, I have a question. I'm sorry, I'll pass and come back because my notes, I can't understand them.
Okay. Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, so wanted to touch on the goals that we came up with. So our goal is to increase 50% of our current housing stock, both downtown and citywide. But we said that right out of the gate, we feel that the existing plans that we have in place are pretty much going to solve the goal of the downtown. But when we talked about the more outlying areas and non-downtown, have we, it doesn't sound like, to talk to Commissioner Edwards' point, which is, if we haven't had a conversation with the developers in terms of, is that goal feasible from their point of view? How do we know we can achieve that goal? One. Two, is it too aggressive? We don't know yet. And then three, shouldn't we up the goal on downtown so that we have something to strive towards, rather than the minute we open the gate, we already achieved the goal and there's nothing really to strive towards? My understanding is that we're trying to constantly putting the football, forward in motion, rather than just kind of spiking the football and saying, okay, we're good, high five each other and then kind of move on. So should we bump it to 60%, 65%? And kind of going from there.
I can speak to those questions around goals. I think that those are excellent questions, and I think that's actually one of the places where we would appreciate thoughts and comments from the Planning Commission, and either as individuals or at the end of this as something more formal. One of our purposes with the goals was to try to make them, I think Amanda said it, achievable and ambitious. I think that the overall housing supply goal is probably a little bit more on the ambitious, and the downtown goal is a little bit more on the achievable. I think some would dispute either of those. So I think that there's certainly some gray area around these. Neither one is clear or obvious how it falls. The goals related to downtown, we have a path towards a lot of those units, and there's a couple of scenarios when, depending on kind of what information you look at, you can say, yes, we can definitely achieve that, or there's some future scenarios where you say we're almost definitely going to fall short. And so I think that I think that it does stand as something that's a little bit undetermined. It also one of the questions was just how ambitious do we want to get here, and 50% seemed like it was something that would be a monumental accomplishment for one neighborhood to go through. So, but I'd certainly be open to the comments to say there should be some different standards set there. Citywide, I do hear that question of how achievable is this. I know that the big question is what has changed in between the last 5 years, or the last kind of 20 years, and the next 5 years. And I think that there's all sorts of indicators that go up and down, and reasons to think that the trend line is going to stay approximately the same or go down based on the economy or other factors like that. The big, the two big changes to the regulatory landscape are around missing middle and accessory dwelling units. I don't know that that's, I don't know what kind of change that would make. And so one of the things that this goal came a little bit less out of what sounds like a good number, and is a little bit more based on where do we see that we need to get as a community. And so in this case, I think the goal is set a little bit more as, I don't know, you could maybe call it a North Star or something like that, where it's we think that we need to be heading in this direction, whether or not we know how to get there. And if we don't know how to get there, then what are the steps that we need to take as a community to get us farther along that path? And this comes right into the work that you do and we do as a community.
Yeah, the reason I ask is it just seems as though that if we're going to have a goal and be put out there, and we say, all right, our goal is going to be create 400 additional units. I don't think there's anybody that would argue that anybody in the development community is not building housing because they don't want to. I think they're building all the housing right now and for the past 5 years that they could, given the landscape, given the cost, given the finances. I mean, you're at 100% right now. Mm-hmm. So if the trend is your friend, and we're saying, okay, there's going to be a chunk of the housing that's going to come from single-family homeowners from HB 2001. They're going to do their own work. That'll have its own number, whatever that is, X. But Y is going to have to be much larger. I mean, I think we'd all assume that a good bulk of this is going to be decreased pressure on the development community to come in and start greasing the skid here a little bit. So if we've set a goal but haven't identified, here's what has changed, like you said, from the past 5 years that will help that grease get to the skid, then I don't know that we can set a goal. I don't think we're far enough along to be able to put that where to put that football. My fear is that we will set an arbitrary goal because it sounds good and that we want to hit it, and the public is going to hear that and go, okay, great, I'm going along with this. I'm going to support it. I want to back this thing. And then 5 years from now, we only hit 100 additional units, and they come back to us. They come back to city government. They look at government just in general and say, you guys failed. You guys promised me that we'd solve this housing problem. You promised me you'd do this and this, that, and everything else, and we don't do it. So I would much rather set a goal of 100 or 200 and know that we can come damn near close to hitting it than to hit an arbitrary number of 400 or more additional units and end up with being short of the goal line.
If I could just jump in really quick, and thank you, Dan, for those comments. I do want to, a couple things I want to point out. So that 6,000 number actually includes the downtown number. So that's 1,000 right there. It also does include the income qualified housing, which I don't have the number off the top of my head. We had a slide at the council presentation that showed how many of those units were actually accounted for under the income qualified and the downtown. And the other thing, the 400 additional units actually comes out of, I mean, I understand what you're talking about with the goal, but I just wanted to give a little background, and it came out of a state study that they did a regional housing needs analysis. And that was really our share of underproduction and population growth that we would need to account for. So it's a real need. And I hear you. I mean, it's like, how are we going to get there? And Will did mention the middle housing, the accessory dwellings. You also recently passed clear and objective, and we're hopeful that makes a difference once it's through the courts. And so there are a number of things in the, there's the middle housing incentives. There are a number of little, I guess there are a number of programs and policies in the HIP that we are hopeful that gets us to that number, that's above and beyond what folks are already producing. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, good.
One more piece of context.
Pardon me?
Can I add one more piece of context on this? Because to respond to
you bet.
The point that
you bet.
Because I think that one of the things that you brought up that was a really important question is the idea of failing and promises and the perception of promises to the community. And one of the things that we have built into this HIP process is a 2-year review. And I think that one of the levers to lean on at that point is to say, is to be able to pull some of the data from the first 2 years of this as we go through, and to say, basically to identify the challenges and the situation where we're in, to either say we're doing very well, the measures seem to be working, or to say we're not going to be anywhere near accomplishing our goal. And so I think that's one hope, but I want to loop back with the draft and see if there's a way to really clearly express what we are doing and what we're not able to do, so that we don't raise expectations falsely. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to say, first off, I really appreciate the report, and I've been learning a lot from it. I feel like I've kind of watched it evolve. I remember when we heard from you in March, kind of watched it since then, and watched the council session and heard some of their discussion. So I'm kind of looking forward to what happens in December and January, but I appreciate what you're doing here and how you're bringing it all together. I've got a couple of questions. I may send you a couple of things offline just to, I guess one thing I would like to ask here, I found myself as I was going through it on page 27, you talk about transportation demand management. And as I've been immersed in middle housing now for well over a year, and I won't say this is an original thought, but it's become, at least my opinion, seems pretty clear to me that transportation costs are, in fact, housing costs in a pretty big way, pretty directly. You kind of touch on that here, and you've got you talk about beginning work on a transportation demand management strategies, and looking to create a strategy to shift transportation modes and reduce burden of transportation. So I read that about 4 or 5 times, and you don't need to spend a lot of time on it. I guess I'm very interested in the intersection of transportation and housing, and I'm kind of curious what you mean by shifting those modes around.
Hi, Commissioner Beeson. I'm happy to actually jump in on that. I've been part of the team that was working on some updates with that. I was working with our transportation planning team, who definitely knows a lot more than I do on this. But in regards to shifting modes, what the goal in the TSP, or the policy in the TSP, is looking to do is to shift from vehicle trips to other alternative modes of transportation, including transit, biking, walking, pedestrian modes of transportation, other micro-mobility options. And really, it's looking at a way to reduce vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, instead of traditional single occupancy vehicle travel.
We'd be looking for a way to maybe offer incentives, different sorts of strategies we might do to try to get people to do things other than drive.
Absolutely, and that's part of what this program was looking at. And then there's also state legislation that I'm also not that familiar with, so I'm speaking a little bit out of my wheelhouse, that I do believe is looking to address these types of changes and work.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Like I said, I'm interested in that as we go along. I don't know if there's life after middle housing, but to the extent there is, and we can ever get into something to do with transportation, I'd be very interested in that. So with that, I'm going to call on Commissioner Taylor.
It's a good follow-up. So I have one follow-up. Thank you, Alyssa and Will, for your comments and responses to Commissioner Isaacson's thought around goals. I actually am in agreement. I personally kind of follow the philosophy of hope is not a strategy. and I really want to build further trust. So I think, Will, thank you for noting that, just making sure whatever documentation that's actually published and finalized really explains. Alyssa went into kind of some of the details of where the numbers came from, and maybe there's some goals that can actually be hit, similar to kind of goals, policy, and action items. So the action items identify what can happen within the next 2 years or until there's a check-in. So we actually look like we're serious, that it's not, here's a number we're going to shoot for, we're going to hope for it. Let's try our best, because as Alyssa said, it's been identified that we need to accommodate that. How are we going to actually get there? Let's take this seriously if we're going to do this. So I appreciate that. It sounds like you're on the same page, and I think writing it and being able to articulate it in a way that's understandable by the public is really important. So that's one thing. The next is, that was my section that I didn't understand my notes. I went through. It has to do with the transportation demand management piece. So like I said, good segue. Can you just clarify? I'm assuming the transportation demand management that's being referenced here is a city initiated process, and not that developers would be going through a TDM burden every time they developed. And that, because I'm just watching for being the facilitator of helping people in our community get through application process. They're big. I mean, you already heard me. I don't need to repeat it. So the more applications you add to that burden, the more people are going to be discouraged from building houses. And then we get to the people that will be able to, or the developers that will be able to, are the developers that have more money, not the mom and pop, not the person that owns their home. So if you could answer that, that will really help me a lot.
I will jump on this one again. So Kristen, or sorry, Commissioner Taylor, I believe they're calling it transportation options. Forgive me, I will send out an email to the Planning Commission that has a link to the website with more information about the program that the transportation planning team is leading. It does include requiring a transportation demand management program for individual developments using a scaled system, starting at like a pilot level and then expanding that throughout developments. However, the intent behind it is to have it apply at the time of building permit through a clear and objective process. That would essentially serve as an a la carte, pick and choose and check the box of how you meet those standards. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here because that's still being fleshed out and worked on. And it is still in the relatively early stages. So I don't want to speak too highly or get too detailed on that at this point.
So, I mean, guess I would encourage, and I know there's a balance here we're trying to strike, is being able to go through kind of a checklist as we're developing these tools as staff and then coming to Planning Commission, City Council. Can the average layperson do it? Is there a way we can get this, that a permit can actually go through, that, I mean, you need a contractor. They already have to have a licensed contractor. And depending on the scale of the project, they need a licensed architect or a licensed engineer. So you've already got a burden there. So now if you have the burden trickle into each of these various applications that keep being added, is there a way that a lay person can get through this? And I understand that check and balance. I also want to stay focused on really what we're trying to achieve. And let's err on the side of getting more housing and making sure that we can facilitate this in a way that the average person can understand how to do this. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Ramey.
Well, first of all, that's terrific advice from Commissioner Taylor. It's been a long time trying to understand how to break down planner speak into what I could describe to someone at the dinner table. So it's a good test, and I think it's an important one to keep track of. I did want to follow up a little bit on the idea of how the 2-year monitoring evaluation process that's built into the report here. It's got a 5-year lifespan, but a 2-year review. And what I want to do, I know we heard a lot from testimony about people who want to see, I think their angle was, let's do the minimum and see how it goes. So I think kind of it might be, since I believe what we're doing is better than the minimum, but still see how it goes, I think is something I'm really interested in. And so it would be an evaluation process, a monitoring process. And I'm going to ask the commission to consider requesting the city council make that a priority and provide funding to monitor and report back on, I don't know what 2-year cycle, for the middle housing piece of this. And I think the reason I'm bringing it up now in this context is that I think as the CIP is created, there are ways in which that data gathering, those things can be dovetailed together. But at the same time, I don't want to lose the middle housing stuff in the pile of 6,000 housing units. I want to be sure that we see it, because it's such a new idea, it's such a new initiative. That's partly why I think I'm going to suggest that the Planning Commission requested the commission that the council make it a priority and provide funding for the kind of an ongoing evaluation of middle housing rules to see how they're doing against their goals, and then come back with recommendations for how they can do better. So that'll be something I'll bring up, later in the process here. I don't think it doesn't fit in the land use code, but it can be a separate, suggestion. As we forward our suggestion to the council, this can be a separate suggestion. So the reason I bring it up tonight is I think the CIH, did I say CIP before? CIH provides an opportunity to begin to build the basis for coordinating these different things. You mentioned all the growth monitoring. You mentioned a lot of things that are already going to be a part of that evaluation. But I really want to see middle housing find its place in all of that, so we don't lose it.
I think there should be a clarification in the public that it isn't the CIA. Those reading, we have nothing to do with the CIA.
Did I say that? Oh, there's just too many letters here.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to call on Commissioner Fraggle. I want to suggest, before I do that, maybe we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to be sure we allow enough time for our second item. So, Commissioner Fraggle.
Thank you. I wanted to loop back around to 2 things. I really agree with Commissioner Taylor that we need to streamline the process, right? If middle housing and ADUs are going to be successful in the community, then we need to make sure the process is accessible, understandable, and can be worked through easily in an inexpensive as is reasonably possible. And so going back to what Commissioner Edwards said earlier, part of the housing tools and strategies recommendations were, there were, I think, over 80 recommendations. Many of them were designed to streamline the process. And so I'm really excited to see the housing tools and strategies recommendations that are being implemented, that have been implemented. But I would hope that as part of the HIP, we could go back to looking at what are the other ones that we could do to streamline the process. And the other thing I want to loop back around to is this conversation around goals. I heard Alyssa provide a lot of really great information that this target has actually been based on need, right? Our population is going to grow and we already lack housing. So in my opinion, this goal may be lower than what we actually need. And if we base the goal on what is critical for the health and well-being of our community, and we don't get there, then the disappointment is not, oh, sorry, people, we didn't build as many houses as we wanted to build. The disappointment is that we need to work harder to actually get to the goal. And so when we're talking about monitoring, I would hope that let's say we get to that 2-year point and we have had success and we are doing better than we had anticipated. Maybe I'm a glass half full kind of gal, but I would hope we could increase the goal at that point, right? If we are meeting goals and objectives. So I like the idea of raising expectations and erring on the side of more housing for our community.
Thanks. Commissioner Rainey.
So following up on that, my understanding is that the goals came from a projection that we had done as part of urban, the urban lands analysis, and that we had inflated that number so that we started, and the 6,000 units was beyond what we thought we were going to grow. And I can see people saying that's not right. Do you want to jump in and say what that is? Because my next question is about that.
Right. So as part of the urban growth boundary, which runs from 2012 to 2032, that was over 15,000 homes. And so this is a different time frame. And so that was about 700 and something a year. This is, the goal is 1,200 a year. So what we determined is, well, the number actually came from is from a regional housing analysis that looked across the region and then distributed it and said, okay, based on your population growth and your underproduction over the last however many years, you're going to need 1,200 a year.
Right. So that's what I'm remembering. It was a number that we inflated and multiplied by 5, and that's how we got to 6,000. So it was partly based on what someone else was telling us we thought we needed, and it was also based on us saying, well, maybe we need more than that. So within that context, if there are, and I heard this at the council meeting, I think if there are 1,000 units downtown, that leaves 5,000, not downtown, 2,700 of those, I think, are to be the market rate, and 2,300 are to be the assisted. So maybe that's right. My question is, what of the 2,700 that are market, how many of those do we think are going to be middle housing? Because I think that is a really important data point to have as we go forward with the rest of the middle housing work. If we're looking at how many units we're projecting we're going to build in 5 years, and we spread those units across the community, I think I heard Councilor Zelenka say it was like 850 units or maybe 900 units that was going to be projected in middle housing, but I couldn't find that data anywhere. But even if, let's say it's 1,000, just for a point of argument, so if it's 1,000 over the time period, and there are a certain number of R1 lots that are available for this kind of development, you can put those ratios together. And that becomes a pretty powerful talking point, which is one of every 20 lots could have a middle housing unit on it to meet our 5-year goal for middle housing. So if we could get that data point and have talking points around that, because it begins to make us understand better what the actual impact is. It's not every R1 lot. Although every R1 lot could take a unit, we think that demand is such that it's only going to be 1 in 20 R1 lots or whatever that number is. And I think that would be a great talking point to have, because it makes a lot of sense from the neighborhood point of view to understand, well, that's 1 per block. No, it's actually 1 per every 5 blocks. Whatever that number is, we begin then to understand how that affects our neighborhoods and where these units might land based on this other really great work that's being done on the HIP, the Housing Implementation Pipeline. So that was my request to staff. If you could somehow get back to us, it could be arranged 750 to 1,000, whatever it is, or maybe you'll just say, we're not going there. And I can say, well, this is what I think it's going to be, because I think having that talking point to look at the available land, look at the number of units we think we might have in this category for the next 5 years, it really helps us understand what is the impact. Does it really mean 1 in my backyard, or does it mean 1 2 blocks away from me? So that's my request. Thank you.
Thanks. So we're about at the end. Before we conclude, I want to give Commissioner Edwards a chance to, okay. He was kind of in and out a couple of times in the queue.
I know.
You're being really patient.
It's okay.
All right. Okay, so I think that's it. thanks to Amanda and Will. We appreciate it. Thank you for the discussion, and thank you for the report. I think we're all interested to see how it evolves. Thanks.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, so we're gonna shift now to middle housing. We're going to shift to the work session on middle housing. This is, I guess, more specifically to discuss the deliberation process and get ready to start that on November 30th, which is, I think, what our current schedule is. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry.
Thank you, Commissioner Beeson. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And somebody let me know if there's any problems. Okay. If you're not seeing my notes, that's good for you, but I will be looking off to the side to see them myself.
You can see them.
Okay. So tonight, as Commissioner Beeson just mentioned, we're going to be talking about the process for deliberations. We're not actually beginning deliberations. Our record period is still open. There's not a problem with talking about things, but tonight the goal is to review our upcoming schedule of meetings for deliberations. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. As a reminder, the overall goals of the Middle Housing Project are to comply with the House bill, to further ongoing work aimed at addressing equity and affordability, and enable more production of diverse housing types across Eugene, which I'm just thrilled to be doing this after the HIP presentation. I think this is really great that we're starting to see how some things connect in the work that we're doing across multiple work teams. So as you all know, we've recently adjusted our schedule, and this chart shows the latest and greatest. The Planning Commission's deliberation sessions are coming up here at the end of November and through December and into January. And we've anticipated our City Council public hearing for March with another opportunity to present jointly to them in hopefully early March. And then Council would take action after the hearing, likely in April. If Eugene does not adopt a local code by June 30th, 2022, the state's model code will apply. Some strong themes emerged from our outreach, and this is just to remind anyone watching what led to our public hearing and code recommendations. The themes include a focus on equity and inclusion as code choices are made, encouraging and incentivizing middle housing across the community, near transit routes, encouraging compact development by reducing parking requirements, and pursuing incentives and programs beyond the code as part of our ongoing housing work through the HIP. This is a new slide that I put together to illustrate the Planning Commission's work on middle housing over the last 16 months or so. The Planning Commission was very involved in each phase of the project. As you will recall, giving input into and then ultimately approving the public involvement plan. That was the first phase. The second phase was design and code concepts, where we had a lot of meetings with our project team and consultant team and went back and forth on allow, encourage, and incentivize options. Then there was the code writing phase, where we went through detailed straw polls and considering different aspects of the code for all the different types of middle housing. And now we are starting and we are in the adoption process. The Planning Commission's public hearing was held last week on November 16th. You voted to hold the record open through November 29th at 5 p.m. Your deliberations will occur November 30th through January 11th, with a meeting scheduled to finalize your comments to the City Council on January 25th. Now I'd like to toss it to Jeff to describe what we're thinking about for your first deliberation session.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, so to get the ball rolling and get everybody warmed up to the deliberations process, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to deliberate on the actual staff recommended changes, which I'm going to show you in just a second and we'll be providing to you later tonight as well as uploading it on the website so that other people can provide commentary on that as well. These are essentially changes that staff has been making to the draft code that was published on September 21st, 2021. And, you know, obviously there's always room for improvement. Some of that improvement was identified through public testimony, pointing out, you know, areas that we could either find new ways to encourage or incentivize middle housing, or just simple fixes. But really the important thing is that these changes are essentially what staff has identified as kind of the components that would improve the code as it's current, that the version that's currently drafted. So what I'm going to do is show you what the staff recommended changes look like. This is going to be pretty exciting. So it's a wonderfully dry document, and I won't scare you by saying that it's another 125-page document, but it is. So just want to recognize that. But what we've tried to do is we've provided a little bit of an introduction here, but more importantly, we've created a table of kind of the 9 most substantive changes that we really think the Planning Commission should consider and likely deliberate on. So you'll see kind of general topics on the left-hand side, item numbers, and there's bookmarks within the document for where these item numbers and changes are actually at within the code to help you navigate that. And then it shows kind of the existing language, what the potential resolution and or changes could be. And then just, you'll see that some here are just for reference and others are for just actual like true discussion. So those ones that are just for reference are, you know, if we made this change, it'll likely impact how the code looks. So for that meeting on November 30th, this will be kind of a template for kind of walking through the staff recommended changes. And what you'll also see attached to this, and this is why it's so long, is we did provide you with a version of the code, the draft code, with our new changes in it. And this is what it looks like. So highlighted in bright red are the changes that we've made since September 21st. So all the black text is the draft code as it stands. And then the red text is what we've changed in the last 2 months based on public testimony and staff review of the code. So the one nice thing I can say is that as you're going through this, and I'm just doing a simple scroll through here, there's not as many changes as there were originally, and the red text kind of really pops out. So as I scroll through this, you'll see a lot of these are really minor changes, and we're looking at not such a massive amount as you saw in the original version. So hopefully this will be a much faster review for you as compared to the original document. One thing that I do want you to take into consideration is that this likely won't be the last set of staff recommended changes. The record is open until November 29th at 5 p.m. We take into consideration testimony as it comes in, just as you do. And we are also continuing to review the code to find areas for improvement. So during the deliberations process, we might come forward with additional recommended changes. Any member of the public who's looking to comment on those recommended changes, obviously I'm going to publish these on the website this evening after our Planning Commission meeting. That's the middle housing website, to be more specific. They can comment on those. If there are changes that are happening during Planning Commission deliberations after the record's closed, those comments will be forwarded to the City Council. So it's not like people can't continue to comment. It just won't be under the Planning Commission's purview. So those will be forwarded to the City Council. And with that, I think, so generally speaking, on the 30th, we'll start with a warm-up looking at the staff recommended changes. And then we can move on into what Terry is going to talk about for the next several days of deliberations.
I'm not going to talk for several days, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Kristen, do you have a clarifying question? I do have a couple more slides, and then we'll do a round of comments. But if you want to talk now, go ahead.
So I just wanted to thank you. I appreciate that kind of formatting. And just so you know, I know I'm not alone in this. I spent a lot of time detailing comments in the original one. So every time there's a change, you considering what that means to our workload in terms of combining it. So I think the first one, that's pretty obvious, right? It's going to show up red. I can cross-reference with what I'm looking at. As we move forward, just if you can still consider that, because you've got this November one, and then you could potentially have another one. It's just really, it's going to get very complex super quickly for us to be talking about changes. So I know you'll be clever with it. It's just, if you can kind of keep that in mind, that would be helpful, because I'm done and it's fully documented. So now thank you.
Absolutely. And one thing that I do encourage, any commissioners is that if you want to reach out to us with those comments, those documented comments, knowing that there's still testimony coming in that's going to be taken into consideration, we're happy to start that review and start talking with you about those changes so that we can be prepared for deliberations when those changes do come in. And just as you mentioned, Commissioner Taylor, I was very intentional not to create a new draft set of changes. So these recommendations, if the Planning Commission agrees that they should be made, or whatever changes the Planning Commission sees fit to be made to change, then we can create a new set that you can base any further reviews off of. And so I do appreciate that, and we'll make sure to take that into consideration.
Yeah, if I could jump in just to be clear, because Jeff and I were working on this document this morning, the document that Jeff will provide to you later tonight and post on the website is a version of the September 21st code amendments that were published and provided to DLCD that is clean. So all the track changes that were in that version have just been accepted. And the only changes that you see in the new version are staff's recommended changes since September 21st. So I don't know how that helps necessarily, Commissioner Taylor, with your review. I just wanted to be clear about what the different versions are. The first version is the changes between the currently adopted code and the proposal to DLCD. The second version is only the changes since the proposal to DLCD. So
yeah, I kind of got that. So for this first time, it's okay. It's going to be work for me, because now I'm going to take your document, insert it into my document, and cross-reference. So that's why I'm saying, as this gets more complicated, it's going to end up being a lot of work for us. So if you have a version with all track changes, that's my preference. I would rather have that. So if you have an option behind us that we can kind of reach out to you and grab, that would be helpful. If you have a full track changes with the original and that kind of evolution, just because we haven't started deliberations, would help a lot, because we've already started our review. And if you don't, this first step, okay, I quickly glanced when you flipped it up there, it doesn't seem like a lot. But if there's a lot the next time, now that becomes much more complicated. Yeah.
Okay. Can we have Terry finish up the other things we might be doing in the next 5 meetings?
I will do that. I also wanted to mention that we will publish this version with your AIS. So that's going to also go out tomorrow for your meeting next Tuesday. So it'll be widely available and shared, and available in lots of places. Okay. Back to sharing. Now you're seeing my notes, aren't you? You are? Okay. I'm going to switch this screen. Hey, that works better for my camera orientation too. Okay. Oh, and one more note on this slide is that we have heard your questions and requests for summarizing public comment into themes. And since the record is still open, we're still working on that, but that is something that we will be bringing forward as we work through your deliberations, kind of grouping the public comment by what the public has to say. So our working proposal for what to cover in your deliberations on December.
We can still see your notes, Terry. Oh, really? Sorry, we can still see your notes. It's great.
Weird.
Your notes are great. You know Jeff is
That's so weird. How about now? Yeah?
Still see him.
Still see him.
That's so weird. I shared the wrong screen. That's the thing. I'm going to try again. Better.
That's better.
Yay,
There you go.
thumbs up. Thumbs
Yay.
up. Okay. Well, then you weren't surprised by what I said because it was right there on my notes. So our plan for tentative topics to bring you for deliberations on December 7th is shown on this slide. These are the first 4 items from your AIS for tonight's meeting. So these have already been grouped. We've heard a lot about these topics in public comment to date. So this could take the whole meeting. We're not real sure, but we're throwing out one way that we could start to work our way through the topics. So these are middle housing lot standards and design standards for all of the middle housing types, including duplex, triplex and fourplex, row house and cottage cluster. So that's things like building height, lot size, coverage, all of those things. The second topic is parking reductions and where they apply and what makes a development eligible for them. The third kind of topic is small unit incentives. So what we're able to do in the code to encourage smaller units. And number 4 is tree preservation and removal standards. If we finish all those, we have another list of items. Or if we don't get through this, that's okay, because we have another meeting on December 14th. And so the next group of topics, again, this is directly from your AIS for today's meeting, are number 5, special area zones, number 6, middle housing land divisions, number 7, other code issues. So this is where there may be items that you all have an interest in that you want to bring up that we haven't discussed yet. Number 8, the Metro Plan policy amendment. That's part of the published code proposals. And lastly, findings and compliance with the Eugene code approval criteria, including statewide planning goals and adopted plan policies. So that's the list that we have, and it kind of reserves some time for anything that's not finished to pick up on January 11th, and also gives us a little bit of breathing room to not rush a recommendation before the winter break. I just have a couple more slides and then I'll stop sharing. This is a reminder to the public mainly about the guide to the adoption process that's on our website. This is what it looks like, and it contains tables that compare the state's minimum standard, what's in the model code, and what the proposed standard is for Eugene. There's also the email address here on your screen, middlehousingtestimony@eugene-or.gov. which is where people can send their testimony to have it considered by November 29th at 5 p.m. That's just a blow up of one of the tables in the guide. This is another piece of material that's in the guide. This shows some mock-ups of different buildings that would be allowed and what they would look like from the back. We've covered this in a previous meeting. This is our lot size map that ties the recommended code to what would be allowed on each lot size category. And then this one is something you all asked for that is in your record but hasn't been discussed in a meeting yet. And that is the different options for where to apply the parking reduction. So you have seen option 1 and 2. You asked for a version that would combine those two, and that's what's in option number 3. So it's the first 2 options plus another suggestion was made to increase the buffer around MX lines to a half-mile walking distance or a half-mile proximity. So the blue is tax lots within a half-mile of existing MX. And that is it. This summarizes our next steps, which I've already talked through a bit. And that is it. So I'll stop sharing and take your questions. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Commissioner Taylor and then I've got myself.
So honestly, I'm very I'm fairly flexible about where we start. Like I said, I'm a very big user of code, so I kind of get how to navigate. One of my observations, first, I would start with definitions. So this is more of a question for the rest of the commission that has less experience. Code it builds on itself, right? So my only concern would be like the definitions I think should go first. I think understanding and getting approval on certain foundational items before getting into the meat of the discussion actually helps with the evolution of understanding and process. So I think I would wait for others. I wanted you to know, I agree, I see where you're coming from. I think it makes sense. I also think my observation is it might take a higher level of kind of understanding how code works to take it and pull it out of the normal kind of, for instance, with people I work with, I would start in the residential zone, understand the base zones, understand where those changes are. Then you go to the next and you're going to go into special development standards. So I guess that would be a question I would be asking for the rest of the commission. Does this make sense for you? But in terms of me, totally get what you're trying to do. I think it's great and I support it. I would just bump definitions up first.
Okay, thanks. So I have a couple of comments. I'll try to be brief. I like what you've put together, and I think that it's going by, I guess I feel pretty flexible on it also. I don't have all of the experience in the detailed review of the code, and I'd certainly defer to Commissioner Taylor and a few others who have that. I guess the one point I want to make, and I guess I want to confirm, Terry and Jeff, maybe that it's kind of inherent in what you've got or implicit in what you've got here as a process. I've believed all along or understood that we're going to have to complete a detailed review of the code. And we've talked about that a bit already. I have also thought, and I think I've heard this from a couple of people on the commission, I think I have, but in addition to a detailed review, I think there's a general, I'm going to call it a general review that needs to occur where we go back through the code amendments. I'm thinking of the approval document you guys put out a few weeks ago that list all of them, and there's like 60 plus or minus in there. And that we go through those to some degree or another, and with the kind of an intention that we complete some additional review on the allow, encourage, incentivize spectrum, if you will. Maybe that's a way to say it. Have we gone far enough on various ones? Have we gone too far? Do we want to adjust them? I think we heard that from some people who gave testimony. I think I've heard, again, some discussion on the part of people in the commission. So that at the end of the day, when we have the recommendation going to the council, we're pretty clear that we've gone through and we're sending the recommendation with the encourage and incentivize to the degree that we as a body think that it ought to be in there. And I guess that's kind of a thing I feel is pretty important that we do and try to get through. And I think in there, just as an example, to me, one thing you'd capture in there is on parking. We would review some of the stuff you just pulled up in a slide. We'd also review one of the things we discussed at one point, which was maybe expanding it to a half mile from a quarter mile. I think that process of doing that level of review would allow us to touch on those things and get it to what we think is right. So thanks. Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you, Commissioner Beeson. I think we've got kind of a Herculean scope in front of us, actually. So I guess I would suggest, I don't think we're going to have time to do kind of, at least my understanding with what Commissioner Beeson has suggested, although Vanessa had a really good template. So it's essentially taking what Commissioner Beeson said, and rather than doing like a separate review, what she did is she took the public process and it was just one column in her spreadsheet, and it was a check and balance. So as we're going through code, and it looks like Jeff and staff have created a spreadsheet, so it's just a check and balance. So as we're moving through it, here we're at this section, these have been the prior discussions. Are we meeting it? Are we going above? Why? So it's looking at that past for consistency. And hopefully I'm understanding with you, Commissioner Beeson. So it's a real time kind of parallel check. And it's because we do have a lot of code in front of us. It will take the time that we have, is my guess. And being able to have that similar to clear and objective actually worked really, really effectively, rather than a separate process, if I was kind of understanding what Commissioner Beeson was proposing. So I just adjusted slightly.
Well, I want to just briefly say, I think you're understanding. It feels pretty clear to me. I don't argue that we have a Herculean task in front of us. I think we heard from some people, and I don't want to make it just a huge task, but I think there are some code amendments that it might be good that we revisit and be sure that we have them set on that spectrum or that scale where we want them. I know that I heard a few people that mentioned that we ought to really take a look at that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I think I don't know who Vanessa is or what that, but if somebody's already done that kind of a thing, it would be great to look at it. Thanks.
So Dan, I'm actually, what you just said is exactly what Vanessa did. So it's just real time. Sorry, I had forgotten you weren't part of that process. So it's exactly what it's just not separate. It's those critical items in the same spreadsheet.
Okay. Commissioner Fragalo.
I did notice that both Lauren and Jeff's hands went up. I didn't know if they wanted to respond to the conversation. And so I will defer to them and then provide my comments.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me jump in, Commissioner Fragalo. A couple of Commissioner Beeson and Commissioner Taylor's comments made me think that from the staff perspective, it would be really helpful for us to know, Commissioner Beeson, if there are, specific code areas that you would like to do a detailed review of, or if there are specific code areas that you would like to go back and spend time on deliberating on whether the proposed code struck the balance that Planning Commission wants in terms of encourage, incentivize, allow. So that way staff can tee that up for the commission, because I would agree with Commissioner Taylor's comments and your comments. This is a large amount of code. And so having enough time to truly do a detailed review of every portion of the code would take a very long time. But certainly if there are portions of the code that the commission is interested in focusing on, that would be great to know, so that we can make sure that that happens during deliberations, and that staff can come prepared to answer your questions and come with suggestions for alternative options, or whatever it is that you would like to see. So thank you for letting me jump in.
Thanks. Jeff, do you want to add into this?
No, Lauren said pretty much what
okay.
I was trying to say, but better.
Okay, Commissioner Fragalo.
Thank you. So I was also thinking about Vanessa's charts, to be honest with you. And what I really appreciated about that was how we were able to crosswalk what the work we were doing, as well as record what some of the decisions were, because when we've had so many multiple layers, it was important to be able to cross-reference that. I do want us to be mindful about the fact that this is a big project and getting way out in the weeds, because I'm already really concerned that I'm looking at when the council is scheduled to make a decision from March to April. Like we are getting so close to the deadline, right? I'm really uncomfortable, honestly, with how close we're getting. So in an effort to, hopefully be able to take on this huge task, I would ask that, if commissioners have ideas of things that they specifically want to address, like do that now, send it to staff now so that we can do it in the process. I'd also like to request I don't want to spend time discussing punctuation or spelling or Scribner errors or typos. Like if you see something, send it to the staff. We don't have to deliberate punctuation. I think we're gonna have a lot to discuss. And so if there's anybody who thinks we should have to bring that up in the meeting, I'd be curious to hear, but I believe like you can provide that like punctuation or typos or spelling errors directly to staff. I'm flexible about how we approach it. What I need is a clear guide when I get the packet, right? So I need to know like what pieces do I need to focus on, and I need that to be clearly articulated in the AIS or the packet. So, the chart that Jeff showed, if like those are the specific pieces we're going to focus on, like I want to have clear guidance on where I need to focus within that huge draft, so that I can be prepared when I come to the meeting. Thank you. And I'm excited to finally be getting there.
Okay, good. I also am. I'm going to call on Commissioner Ramey first. He hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you. Thank you. I have 4 kind of broad themes I'm going to be looking at, and I'm going to be testing to see how the changes affect those themes. And I guess my question is that useful to have ahead of time, or it's almost a way I'm keeping my own notes? And if you get that ahead of time, could I copy everyone, or is that not going to be a good idea? Give me some help here. It's really like, here's the 4 things I'm looking at, and I'm going to filter all of these changes through those 4 ideas.
So Commissioner Ramey, I think that would be very helpful for staff to have, because that will help us to be prepared, hopefully, to answer questions or respond to comments that you have, through those lenses. If you would send your information to staff, then we can disseminate it to the rest of the Planning Commission if you would like that. To Jim specifically.
Yeah, I'd be happy to collect that material and then get it out to the rest of our team. But I can collect it and kind of see what those themes are.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
I just want to, I am planning on taking Jeff up on his offer. So I am going to meet with him and go over kind of my comments. I did do a deep dive on the entire document. So are we open, and based on that, I guess if there's main things, I mean, staff's identified them. Are we open to bringing up very discrete pieces? So there might be something in a dangling code section that basically, after talking to Jeff and Lauren, I talked to Lauren about this a little bit, is it is something where staff feels pretty strongly about something, which is great. And if any of us want to bring it back to council, it's not in those areas. Are we able to do kind of some housekeeping at the end and maybe elevate some of the straggling pieces? That would be my only question. There's a lot of content here.
Terry or Commissioner Beeson, I would defer to both of you, but from my perspective, that makes sense. I think that there probably will be some content that doesn't quite fit into the identified topic areas, or that comes up later. So, and I, as I recall, I think that is something that the commission did during the clear and objective process, that there was sort of an, at the end, basket. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to bring up? So from a staff perspective, I will say that makes some sense to me.
And we included the other within that list of topic areas. We did include other code issues. We didn't put it at the end, so we'll make sure to transition another option for that at the end so that it can happen again.
The only thing I would add is that we are anticipating you having the opportunity to sum up your feelings as a commission in a letter that you can write to council and then present to council in a joint session before their hearings. So that's another opportunity. Oh, and while I'm talking, I just want to say and remind you that Clear and Objective was managed by Janessa Dragovich.
I do that way too many times.
It's okay.
Janessa. She can laugh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I know who that is. I couldn't for the life of me understand who that was. Now I know.
Hopefully I didn't do it. Maybe I did too, but I might have.
It's all right. We know what you're talking about.
Okay, I'm not at the moment. I saw Commissioner Isaacson's hand momentarily. Do you? Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing any more hands, and I know you'll all be interested to know that I'm looking at a really good view now where I can see your hands. So just saying. All right. Any other comments, or Terry, do you have more? Oh, Commissioner Taylor.
I just want to give kudos. I think this is, I know it was said at the hearing. I do think this was, I think Vision Eugene was a really exemplary process, quite frankly, in terms of outreach and grabbing as much of the population and voice as we could. I mean, just hats off to staff for this process. And overall, everything in this code, it's really, I think it is documenting everything that the process well. So I just wanted to say, well done. It really is an example of a product that's representing a very thorough process. So thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands. Terry or Jeff, do we have any more?
We don't. I don't have anything. Jeff, do you have anything else to? Okay, great. Thank you all.
Okay, so you're going to be sending material out to us, and we're going to meet on November 30th, and we're going to start our process. So I guess with that, I'm going to, unless there's any, I'm going to shift to the next agenda item.
I can keep it really short.
Alyssa, please.
Yes, I'll keep it really short. Just I sent out an email about your updated schedule and said, unless I heard from any of you, we were going to tack another 30 minutes onto your deliberations meetings. And so, so we'll be going, those will be running from 5:30 to 8, and we'll try to find a quick break somewhere at a logical stopping point for those. And so that's for your upcoming deliberations meetings. I don't have any updates on recruitment. Unfortunately, I'm waiting to hear back from City Manager's Office and Mayor about how that process is going to go. I will let you know as soon as I hear something. Upcoming council items, Amanda and Will mentioned that downtown housing related to the HIP is going to be going on December 13th, which is Monday. So that'll be at the 5:30 work session. And then I'm also, finally, we've got a contract for the land acknowledgement training. And so we'll be sending out some dates. I'd really like to have the new commissioner here, but we'll just see how that's going to work out. But we'll have some dates, looking at some dates in January to have that training. That is all I have.
Good. That's good to hear. I've been looking forward to the land acknowledgement training. That's good to hear. Okay, we'll go to items from commissioners, and I have Commissioner Taylor. Okay,
so I just want to, because it's kind of early still tonight, can I just get an understanding? So when we start our deliberations, so is this going to be our normal process that we go through it, we identify which section, go through it, do a straw poll, kind of vote, and then do a motion? How do you envision that, just so that we can kind of start that meeting and kind of move forward?
For the first day of deliberations, that's the anticipated model we'll be using, going through the staff recommended changes, straw polling those changes, and seeing if Planning Commission wants to deliberate on each one of those, and then eventually look at that document of staff recommended changes if there's any other things that you don't want us to incorporate into the draft code. Following that, given the scope of the changes, the reason that we have grouped these things into batches is it doesn't appear to us that there would be enough time to go line by line through the code with the commission. So by bringing up topics, we're hoping that we can focus on specific sections of the code that are of interest or that present issues that the planning commissioners might want to tackle. So that's how we're looking at it so far. We're going to see how that functions, but we don't have as much time as we did with clear and objective. You know, I won't pretend that we're not feeling the pressure of just that deadline coming in July. So that's our concept for now, and we'll provide further guidance on kind of how that's going to work in our AISs and at the beginning of those deliberations. And that's another reason why it's just so important to be communicating with staff with those topics that you're interested in, so that we can make sure that we can dedicate enough time to each one of those and incorporate the changes that you see as being necessary.
So I'll give you feedback when I meet you. Here's one item I didn't see in there that's fairly substantial, and it does directly relate to burden, is adjustment review. So I just wanted to bring that up.
And that is exactly the type of stuff we want to hear. So please send over those kind of thoughts as they come up.
Commissioner Fragola.
I had a question for Alyssa. Alyssa, did we ever settle on committee assignments? I'm feeling worried that I missed something. And...
You didn't.
Okay.
Thank you for the reminder. And you brought that up, I think, recently, and I almost have it done. I was kind of working on the final touches. I actually should have that out for you next week. There are a couple that currently, I mean, based on that, we'll have no one attached to them, but we can talk about that at a future meeting and get that resolved. So you're not missing anything.
Okay, great. I thought I'm missing meetings or I'm missing something. So thank you.
You're good. You're good.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, I just inspired to say something also. You know, I agree. I really want to thank staff for what they've done, and also the rest of the commissioners, especially as being the newest member and kind of shepherding me along the past year. You know, we're the first state in the country to do this. So while there's a lot of pressure on us to get it right, if we do it right, when we do it right, there'll be other states who will be looking to us, looking to our community for how we did it, what we did, and to be calling folks, you know, like Alyssa and Terry, and asking them what worked, what didn't, how they can improve upon it. So the pressure is slightly, I think, elongated by that, and I'm encouraged and excited to know that we have small little puzzle piece in fitting that together for having solved some of the housing issues in multiple states, not just ours.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I think we'll I think we'll call it good, and see everybody on November 30th. So I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Recording stop.